Okay, these are your examples for sections 8.2 and 8.3 on parallelograms. Now, you need to have the worksheet that I gave you in class to go along with these. If for some reason you don't, you need to recopy all 4 of these examples, and you won't be able to finish this because you're going to have something to do on your own at the end. So, what I need you to do is make sure you have the worksheet with you. We're going to work out the first 4 examples on the 8.2 side. Okay? We're only going to do the 8.2 side right now. So make sure that you're on that side of the worksheet and you have the worksheet with you so that you can work these out. Alright, the directions for all 4 of these say to determine x and y. Now, what we need to do, we're going to use those 4 big ideas that we talked about in the first video. Okay, they apply to all 4 of these examples. What's tricky is that we need to figure out which one or which 2 apply to the picture. So we're going to start with example 1. We have in our picture here, we have a y up here at the top, 8y, 88 on the bottom. Those are sides. Okay, so we're probably going to use one of our big ideas about sides. And then we have an angle over here that's 6x. So we're going to have to use one of our ideas about angles. And there were a couple of them. There were 2 of them that we talked about in the video last time. It doesn't matter which one you usually start with, x or y. Sometimes, and we'll do an example, I think it's example 2, where it dictates which one you should start with. There is a certain one you have to do first. So usually we do the one that comes first in the alphabet. So we're going to start with x. Okay, to find x. Alright, if we look here, there's a couple things we notice. Remember we said it dealt with angles. So we're going to go through and we're going to look at our angles here. We have a right angle down here. That's important. Remember we said if there's one right angle in a parallelogram, then all 4 are right angles. So that's one idea we could use. The other idea we can use is that we said opposite angles are congruent. So since the 90-degree angle here is across from the 6x, those 2 angles are going to be congruent to each other. And I said in the last video that congruent things, you've learned this before, congruent things can be set equal to each other. So we can solve this by saying 6x equals 90. And either of those ideas, either the one with the 4 right angles or the ones that are congruent, they will both get you to the same answer. There's just different little tweaks in how you think about the problem. Okay? So we're going to use this idea of setting them equal because they're congruent. So 6x equals 90. We divide both sides by 6. 90 divided by 6 is 15. And we can stop there because all it wanted us to do is find x. So we're done. Now let's go to y. Y we said deals with sides. So if we think back what we learned about sides in a parallelogram, we said that opposite sides are congruent. And just like we did with those angles, things that are congruent, we can set them equal to each other. So we can say 8y equals 88. Divide both sides by 8, and y equals 11. Okay? That one's not too difficult. Pretty straightforward example. All we have to do is set things equal to each other, but make sure you know why you're setting them equal to each other. That's the important. The angles equal to each other because opposite angles in a parallelogram are congruent. And we set the sides equal to each other because opposite sides are congruent. Okay? Let's look at example number 2 now. Example number 2. We have x's and y's, and all we have here are angles. Okay, so we're going to use these ideas of angles. Notice that we have a 12x here, 6x, and then a 3y. Okay? Now, we talked about, like we did in example 1, angles across from each other are congruent. So we could set 3y equal to 12x. It's not going to get us anywhere, though, because we don't know what either one of those variables are. And this is what I said earlier, where usually you're going to have to solve one of them first. We have to solve x first in order to figure out y. So we have to get x figured out, probably have to plug it back in and get an answer, and then go back and find y. So we have to solve x first in this problem. So let's look here. We said that those 2 angles are congruent. Well, the 6x and the 12x, they're along the same side. Okay? We said if angles are along the same side, then they're called consecutive. And in a parallelogram, consecutive angles are supplementary. Remember, supplementary means they add to 180. So that's how we're going to find x. We're going to say, we're finding x here, and they're consecutive. That's the idea. So 6x plus 12x equals 180. That's the big idea we're going to use. Now 6x plus 12x, I have 18x's there. That equals 180. We'll divide by 18. So x is 10. And that problem is solved. Okay? Now, we did say that 3y and 12x, they're equal to each other. They're congruent. So what we can do is we can plug 10 back in for x and figure out that this angle is 120 degrees. So to find y, their opposite angles, that's the idea we're using, we say 3y equals 120, because that's what we get for the angle after we plug the 10 back in. Now divide by 3, and y ends up being 120 divided by 3 is 40. So there's the answer to that problem. Again, not too difficult, but we have to know what we're doing in order to find x and y. We really have to know those 4 big ideas to solve them. Now let's look at number 3. Number 3, all of our measurements are on the sides. All of the expressions are on the sides. So for this one, we're going to look at the ideas about sides. And we talked about them in number 1. We said that opposite sides are congruent. Well, that means that these two are going to be the same, and these two are going to be the same. We have to set them equal to each other to solve. So let's set that up. 30x equals 150, and the second one would be 2y equals 72x. Now let's stop for a second. This second equation, the 2y equals 72x, we can't solve that yet because both sides have different variables. So it's like what we did in example 2. We couldn't solve 3y equals 12x because we didn't know what one of the variables were. So let's solve this first one here, the 3y equals, not 3x. I need to rewrite that. I made a mistake. 30x. 30x equals 150. Solve for x, and then go back, plug it in, and solve for y. So if 30x equals 150, divide both sides by 30, and x ends up being 150 divided by 30, which is 5. Now we take that 5, and we're going to plug it in for x. So 72 times 5 ends up being 360. And that's what 2y equals. Okay? So again, we have to plug that x in order to find y. And that's pretty common. You'll see that in a lot of examples. Okay, so now we just divide by 2. And y ends up being 360 divided by 2. Half of 360 is 180. So there's our answer. Now you could check that by plugging in your answer for y and making sure that you got the same answer for the top and the bottom after plugging in your x and plugging in your y. That's an easy way to check. You don't have to, but that's a good way to check if you think your answer is weird. Last example here. Now this one's a little difficult. We've got a parallelogram. Notice that the 4 sides are marked congruent, okay? And we have angles marked. We have a 90-degree angle here. We have a 60-degree angle, and then a 2x in the bottom left, and a 4y at the top right. Now, we're going to solve this in 2 parts. We're going to find x first, just like we did before. Then we're going to find y. And we'll talk about what we're doing as we go. Okay? Well, if that's the right angle there in the corner, that means the one next to it, the center, then all of these have to be right angles. Okay? Because they're supplementary. Angles next to each other have to add to 180. They make a straight line. So if one of them's 90, then the one next to it has to be 90. And that works all the way around. You could also use the idea of vertical angles. Angles across from each other in that X shape have to be congruent. So if the top one's 90, then the bottom one's 90. Okay? What happens then, and I'm going to redraw part of our picture, is that we have a triangle with 90 and then 60 and 2x. So I redrew this triangle here where I put that green dot. That's the triangle I redrew down here, okay? And we have to think back a little bit. We have a triangle here. We have all of the angles in the triangle. We have an angle that's 90, an angle that's 60, and an angle that's 2x. How many degrees are in a triangle? That's what we need to think about. That's 180 degrees in a triangle. So what we do is we would say 2x plus 60 plus 90 equals 180. Or, since you know one's 90 and one's 60, you could subtract those from it first, from the 180, and set whatever's left equal to 2x, which is essentially what we're going to end up here with. We're going to combine things that are the same. 2x plus 60 plus 90 is 150 equals 180. Subtract 150. 2x equals 180 minus 150 is 30. Divide both sides by 2. So x is 15. Okay? So that one's a little trickier. That one, we didn't use these ideas that we talked about about parallelograms. We used the ideas about triangles. So you really need to pay attention to what you're looking at, what you're doing here, okay? Because it will show up again. Everything we've learned before can come back and show up again in these examples. To find why, though, we are going to use one of these ideas. And it's not one of the 4 big ones that we talked about. It's the idea that a diagonal splits a parallelogram into 2 congruent triangles. So I'm going to redraw the parallelogram, and I'm only going to put in the diagonal that we need, which is this one. Okay? We know that this angle here is 30, and this angle is 4y. So if we think back to what we did before, these 2 angles are going to be congruent. There's a couple reasons why. They're in the same place. That's the very last idea we talked about in the other video. And those 2 angles are in the same place. Okay? The other idea is these are parallel lines, and this one may be easier to understand. This can be our transversal here. So these are alternate interior angles. Okay? And when we have parallel lines, alternate interior angles are congruent. So that's important. We know that. And that's something we talked about way back in chapter 3. So again, these ideas are coming back. We can set them equal. 30 equals 4y because they're congruent. Again, alternate interior angles are congruent when we have parallel lines. Okay? So we divide both sides by 4. And y ends up being 7.5. Or, if you want to leave it as a fraction, 15 over 2. It's an improper fraction. Okay? So that one's a little trickier. I will give you the fact that number 4 really doesn't deal with those big ideas so much as the other 3 do. They talks about ideas that we have learned before. Okay? So what I want you to do, what I want you to get from this video is these 4 examples. If you have any questions about these 4, go back and rewatch the video. And if you still have questions, bring them to class next time. Now, I said there was going to be something you needed to do on your own, okay? And this is the rest of that worksheet. We've done 1 through 4 together. What I want you to do is try number 5. Number 5 is tricky. We will go over it in class, but I want to see if you can figure it out on your own. And then you need to do 6 through 10. Okay? So really, you have to have, for class next time, problems 6 through 10, 5 questions, and I want you to have tried number 5. Okay? That's important. That's what you need to have done before you get to class. Okay? Again, if you have any questions, watch the video again. Make sure you know those 4 big ideas, and if you still have questions, bring them to class next time.